Welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast. I'm Monica Reinagel, and today I want to answer some great questions I received from longtime listener Anne Marie, who wanted to know more about making kefir and how its benefits compare to yogurt. Fermented foods like kefir and yogurt have been gaining popularity in large part due to the explosion of research on the human microbiome, the community of microorganisms living in and on our bodies, and the benefits of probiotic foods. Probiotic foods contain beneficial microorganisms, which can inhibit the growth of harmful pathogens, enhance digestion, and synthesize valuable nutrients such as B12 and vitamin K. There are thousands of different strains of probiotic bacteria, and eating lots of different kinds of fermented foods will give you exposure to a wider array of benefits. Besides kefir, fermented foods include, of course, yogurt, but also sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and kombucha. And each of these brings its own unique benefits, bacteria, and flavors to our diet. I also want to take a moment to distinguish between the bacteria that we find in probiotic foods and the resident bacteria that live in our gut, because this is often misunderstood. Probiotic foods do help to maintain a healthy balance in our digestive system, but those bacteria that they contain don't necessarily become permanent residents of our microbiome. Instead, they pass through our system, helping out along the way. If you're interested in fostering that resident population of microbes, then your best play is to eat plenty of fiber from a variety of sources: beans, legumes, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and so on. The fiber in these foods provides a food source for those resident bacterial populations. And the better and more varied a diet we feed them, the healthier and more varied that population will be. With that context, let's talk a little bit more about kefir in particular. Kefir is a fermented milk drink that's believed to have originated in the Caucasus Mountains, where it's been part of the traditional diet for hundreds or even thousands of years. And it's made using kefir grains, which are a mix of proteins, sugars, bacteria, and yeasts known as a SCOBY, which stands for Symbiotic Colony of Bacteria and Yeasts, SCOBY. These grains likely came about by chance, discovered by nomads who carried milk around in animal skins where it naturally fermented. Now, although this dramatically altered the flavor and the texture of the fresh milk, fermentation also greatly extended its shelf life without refrigeration. Early kefir consumers learned to strain these grains out of the soured milk and then use them to ferment the next batch. These living colonies, gelatinous, walnut-sized blobs resembling cauliflower florets, were carefully nurtured, often passed down through generations. Like other fermented foods, kefir promotes gut health, boosts the immune system, and helps to regulate the body's anti-inflammatory responses. However, kefir also has some unique benefits that set it apart from other fermented foods. Kefir offers a more diverse microbial population than other fermented dairy products like yogurt, thanks to that SCOBY. And it also contains a unique polysaccharide called kefiran, which contributes to its anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. The presence of those yeasts in the kefir's SCOBY also lead to the production of small amounts of alcohol and carbon dioxide, which results in a slightly fizzy drink. Commercially produced kefir is processed to remove this alcohol, but homebrewed kefir can contain anywhere from 0.5% to 2% alcohol, depending on how long it's been fermented. In general, the fizzier it is, the more alcohol it contains. Now, just full disclosure here, kefir can be an acquired taste. If you enjoy drinking buttermilk, you'll probably also enjoy unsweetened kefir. And for those who find it too sour, it can be flavored with pureed fruit or vanilla extract or used in smoothies. And it can also be used in place of milk or buttermilk in things like muffins and pancakes, where it adds a sourdough-like tang. You can use it in breads or pizza crust as well. However, like any probiotic food, if you heat kefir above about 110 degrees Fahrenheit for any length of time, it's going to kill the beneficial bacteria and yeasts, and this will diminish its probiotic benefits. Now, how does kefir compare to yogurt nutritionally? Both kefir and yogurt contain lactobacillus bacteria, and these digest the lactose or milk sugars in the milk and produce lactic acid. So both products are going to have that tart flavor. If you're sensitive to lactose, kefir might be easier for you to digest because its fermentation process can break down more of the lactose than yogurt. But both are going to contain comparable amounts of protein and calcium. In terms of the texture, yogurt is usually thicker. You eat it with a spoon, while kefir is more like a drink. So whether you prefer the spoonable texture of yogurt or that refreshing fizz of kefir, both of these can be nutritious additions to your diet. Traditionally produced kefir contains dozens of different bacteria and yeasts. Commercial producers, on the other hand, use a limited number of carefully selected species in order to create a more consistent product. But some of the health benefits that are traditionally ascribed to kefir may actually depend on the more varied cultures that you're going to get in a traditionally fermented kefir. Fortunately, making kefir at home is easier than you might think. It's actually a little bit simpler than making yogurt. Unlike yogurt, which requires heating the milk and then maintaining a specific temperature, kefir ferments at room temperature. No special appliances necessary, and this makes it a really convenient option for home fermentation. So to start, you'll need some of those kefir grains, that living mix of bacteria and yeast that are going to ferment the milk. And you can find these online at health food stores or sometimes from friends who might be making their own kefir because the grains multiply when you use them and can be shared. So to make your kefir, you're going to add fresh milk to those grains, and you can use cow, goat, or sheep milk. You can use non-fat, reduced fat, or whole. However, because you will not be sterilizing the milk before fermenting it the way you would if you were making yogurt, it's really important only to use pasteurized milk. And also, you want to be sure that the container that you're using to ferment it is scrupulously clean. After you add the kefir grains, you'll cover that jar with a clean cloth or paper towel. Some people like to secure that with a rubber band, and then you just leave the jar on the counter at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours. And over that time, the milk will thicken and it's going to develop that tangy flavor as it ferments. So if you like a milder flavor, you're going to want a shorter fermentation time. Once the kefir reaches your desired taste and consistency, then you're going to strain it through a mesh strainer to separate those kefir grains back out from the liquid. The liquid kefir will keep in the fridge for 7 to 10 days. And when you're ready to make your next batch, you'll put those strained grains back into a clean container and add fresh milk. It's that easy. So as long as they have regular access to a fresh food supply, in other words, milk, those grains will remain viable indefinitely. I have some in my refrigerator right now that I have had for 10 years. And in fact, you could easily end up making the kefir faster than you can consume it. So if you're not ready to make your next batch immediately, you can store those strained grains in a small amount of milk, just enough to cover them, in the fridge for up to 10 days. Then when you're ready to use them again, you'll just discard the milk that they've been stored in and start over with fresh milk. If you need to store them for longer than 10 days, just pop them in the freezer. And to revive them, you just add a little bit of milk for them to snack on while they thaw. Making kefir at home is straightforward, but there are a couple of challenges that you want to be aware of. The consistency and the flavor of homemade kefir can really vary from batch to batch, and this is due to variability in the microbes that are present in the milk that you're fermenting and in your kitchen environment. So even if I were to share my colony of grains with you, the kefir that I ferment on my kitchen counter is not going to be exactly the same, not going to taste exactly the same as the kefir that you brew in your kitchen. And this diverse population of microorganisms in kefir grains can also change over time and with different conditions. So that makes it challenging to quantify the exact probiotic or the exact alcohol content of homemade kefir. But if you are a frequent kefir consumer, making your own can save you some money, and it gives you the satisfaction of nurturing a living culture. Now, water kefir is another fermented beverage also made with a SCOBY, but instead of fermenting milk, you ferment sugar water or fruit juice. Now, you would need a different SCOBY than the one that you'd use for milk because the bacteria in a milk kefir SCOBY specifically like to eat the lactose in milk. Water kefir is obviously dairy-free, and it has a lighter, more refreshing taste. On the other hand, it doesn't contain any protein, any calcium, and it's obviously going to be higher in sugar. In the show notes for today, I will include a link to one of my favorite online resources for all things related to fermenting and culturing foods. It's called culturesforhealth.org. And this is a great place to get a SCOBY if you don't have a local source. But it's also a really good source of information, instructions, and tips for home fermenters. Thanks to Anne-Marie for her question. And if you have a question you'd like me to answer on the podcast, you can email it to me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com or leave me a voicemail at 443-961-6206. Come check out my other podcast. It's called The Change Academy, where we talk about the art and science of creating positive behavior change, which is just as fun and interesting as the science of food and nutrition. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. Just look for Change Academy. Nutrition Diva, meanwhile, is a quick and dirty tips podcast where our awesome team includes Brandon Getchis, Nathan Sems, Davina Tomlin, Holly Hutchings, and Morgan Christensen. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.